As a hello to anyone who I haven't had the pleasure to meet, I'm Leela Collins. I've been with the Limit Break Committee for the last couple of years. This is my third year, and trying to juggle volunteer and work, never easy. So in previous years, I would have done Lean Coffee monthly, but this year it just wasn't quite feasible. So Jonas and I came up with this idea that we would instead try to encourage people who are members of Limit Break to want to have a go doing this themselves. So a bit about myself as well is I have been a producer in indie games in Northern Ireland. I've also worked with a publisher in the UK, and as well as that, have worked with state funding organisations like Northern Ireland Screen, and now I work with Screen Ireland in the South. So the purpose of that as well is to help support people in creative industries, and my experience being in games, and just big fan. Whenever I decided to get into video games, which seemed like a genius idea at the time, I was moving over from working in tech, where lean coffee is very common. There's a thing called lean agile. At its core, this is basically structures to help you fail faster, structures to help you with communication, structures to help you with ideation. So Lean Coffee got started in Seattle back in 2009. Whenever I first started out as a product manager, I went to my first Lean Coffee, and I found it very comforting that someone asked the question, what is a product manager? And someone with 15 years experience said, I still don't know. So I'm very passionate about this as a safe space for people to be honest and knowledge share. Whenever I decided to transfer over from tech into games, this happened 2 weeks before COVID, and then lockdown happened. So my whole plan of networking, in person with people to convince them to hire me kind of went out the window. And whenever I started looking at, marketing on social media and realizing that that wasn't going to help me with engaging with my local community, I reached out to NIGD, which is the Northern Ireland Game Developer Discord, which now has like over 1,000 people. And I asked if I could run a monthly social networking lunchtime type event called Lean Coffee. And of course, there was a typo where he accidentally put down that it was going to be a weekly event, and I'm really stubborn. So for over a year, I ran a Lean Coffee every Thursday morning for NIGD, and then also started to overlap with Limit Break. So I am somewhat experienced in running these now, I think. Right, so we'll get stuck in. I did want to do a presentation with slides to kind of take a slower approach, but that did not quite happen in time. So instead, I'm going to send you the how-to slides after this. But I have put up on the board here what a Lean Coffee looks like, and it is incredibly simple. There was a reason I was able to do this as a weekly event, because once you know this format and once you start to hone your facilitation skills, this is one of the easiest ways to engage with your community, build up your credibility, and learn more from different people's experiences and different walks of life. So actually, on doing this as a weekly thing, I do strongly believe Lean Coffee is how I built up credibility within my local industry, and it opened me up to a lot of job opportunities. It also helped me get closer with my community of peers, which, as you all know, this is a rough time in games, and having people around you who understand and who support you does make a world of difference for your mental health. So I'm a big believer in community, especially within the games industry, which just has the coolest people. So usually how I would kick these things off, or actually I'll start with how I would set up this board. And I think that, oh, by the way, if anyone has questions or anything, I can kind of go a mile a minute. If you want to raise your hand, this is very informal. You're struggling to see with, sorry, the message isn't coming up. Sorry, VI. I don't know what VI is.
Vision impairment.
Ah, okay. I will zoom in as well. Sorry, this was just me and Jonas testing this out, and I decided to leave it up. So I will zoom in for all of this. Right, so I will also talk about how you could do these in person. I do find that remote is a bit of an easier one to organize because then people can do it from their offices, from home, and it's easier yourself as well to set up and manage how everything is going with the timers and the voting that you can do online. If you do want to do this in person, you'll need an open space. You'll need a board, preferably that you can write on or even use tape to create a grid. You want to have a stack of Post-its. You want to have pens or markers, and you want to have little voting dot stickers as well on hand. But this is Mural, which is what I've been using. Right. Does this help with the zooming? Is it a bit easier to see? Okay. Right. So when setting up this board, what you want to do is have these as your 3 priorities. So I've made a little section where people can post up their questions. And then you've got your columns for discuss, discussing, and done. So this will kind of explain then the structure of the Lean Coffee. You'll welcome everyone into your space and you'll define what it is that we're going to be doing. So Lean Coffee is a format to help create an agenda democratically with the people who are attending. Everyone has a few minutes to write down questions or topics that they would like to discuss. Sometimes we would theme a Lean Coffee to look at a specific area. That could be a specialty in your career. It could be breaking into the industry. It could be your experience with events. So this is just your opportunity to try and hone in on what it is that we're going to look to achieve. So whenever I was doing this for Limit Break last year, it was very much looking at questions about profession, questions about the industry, questions about getting into the industry or moving up in your career. So I would set a timer. If people can see the little timer icon up here, I am a big fan of Mural. It's just one of those more accessible ones. Miro does allow you to do a lot more, but I find Mural, people were able to pick it up a lot faster. So I would set the timer for 3 minutes and encourage people to write up their questions. Another thing that Mural allows you to do is have anonymous people. So one of the other key parts of Lean Coffee is a thing called the Chatham House Rule. This comes from politics. Basically, this rule is that any information that is shared at this event is free for anyone to use, but what you should not do is name who shared the information unless they have specified otherwise. So this means that if someone works in a big company and they're not necessarily breaking NDA because NDAs still apply, but they're able to share their personal experience without worrying about it coming back on them. So I've had an issue with one of my managers and conversations fell apart, and this was my experience and this is how I tried to deal with it. That is a story that is unique, but if you name the person or name the company, then that's how people could figure out who this is about, and that could get that person in hot water. So Chatham House rules are really, really important, and I would stress those a lot to people whenever they are starting out in this. So once the timer goes off and people have posted their questions, little question mark, then I would give everyone voting dots. So people would usually get 3 votes, and they would then read through the different Post-its and vote on what they wanted to discuss. Once everyone has voted, we would then end the voting session. And another thing that Mural does, which is handy, is gives me the list of the top Post-its that people voted for. So this is when we really get into Lean Coffee. And we will start to drag over the top voted into the to discuss column. After this, I'm really hoping, I can't seem to be able to zoom in on the icons, so I'm hoping that you can see where my cursor is here. Let's see. There is.
If it's not obvious as well, I think it's worth just visually describing, like you're pointing to an icon at the top of your screen that looks like a stopwatch or, 3 dots. I think to give a little visual descriptor.
Yeah, so there's an icon and it's of a stopwatch, and whenever you hover on it, it does say timer. So this is where we would set it as being a 7 minute. Is it 7 minutes? It is 7 minutes. 7-minute timer where we would bring over the to discuss topic and start this timer. And this is where I think facilitating does get really tricky. So there are a few techniques that I think are really handy, because as a facilitator, you could know an answer. You could have loads of ideas, but it's trying to not fall into that like dictatorship of like, well, I'm going to answer this and explain everything to you. This is about getting different people's different perspectives. So one of the best techniques that I learned is when things are quiet and you are in charge, it feels like it's gone on a lot longer than it maybe has. So this is also a thing with public speaking. Your pauses feel longer to you than they're maybe being perceived. So when people are needing that bit of extra time before talking, I would count to 10 in my head. And it would feel like a really, really long time, but it does create that space for someone to raise their hand and start engaging. And you'll find that once one person starts, then another and another. And your job as the facilitator is to be encouraging. It's also to kind of manage who is talking the most, making sure people get equal opportunities. I would use Google Meets, or my favorite is actually using the stage on Discord, because that also means people can listen in. People don't have to have their cameras on, and people can come up to the stage and you can have a queue so you don't have people talking over each other. Also, as a facilitator, you want to be wary of people who are maybe saying things that are not appropriate. So this is not you controlling what can and cannot be said, but more steering people to stay neutral, steering people away from bad language, and knowing when to stop someone as well, which is probably the most intimidating thing when someone starts to go off on a tangent. Or I've actually had someone who, well, this is Chatham House Rules stuff here, but there was a conversation that happened at one of the many, many Lean Coffees that happened, where someone was sharing their personal experience of being at an event and being assigned female at birth and how they were treated in that space. And this was a really lovely thing that someone felt comfortable enough to share. As a facilitator, I tried to make sure that they felt supported, but also make sure that we weren't going to get too deep into a discussion that could be upsetting or triggering for anyone else. I then had someone else come up to speak who decided that they did not want to continue talking about the topic that we were discussing, which was being discriminated against at events, and tried to talk about a different experience. And it very much was maybe this person didn't realize their privilege, and that yes, what they had experienced in a completely different environment as a completely different person was valid, but they were trying to basically take over this conversation and steer it towards an area that they felt comfortable in. And it has taken years to build up a confidence to kind of step in and say, I appreciate you sharing this story with us. We do want to try and stay over in this topic. And if you can just, I can't remember exactly what I said, but you do need to think about, rather than putting your hand straight in front of someone's face, redirecting their energy and using the right kind of language. Emotional intelligence is hopefully something everyone is kind of familiar with. Yes, Svetlana, sorry.
Hey, sorry, just a quick question, if you don't mind me interjecting. I was curious if you have experience with coffees where you pick, for example, 3 topics, let's say, and you want to go over them, everyone commits to the timer. But let's say the second one, like the conversation is really flowing, people are really engaged, there's not one person. Do you, like personally, do you allow for that to continue and sacrifice the third thing? Or do you still cut in?
So this, you've actually just managed to move us along really well. That's facilitation right there, because at the end of the timer, we then have a democratic vote on whether or not people want to keep going with the conversation and add 3 more minutes, or thumbs down and they move on to the next topic. So this is another way that you then give autonomy to the team, and they're able to then decide what they want to keep chatting about. So I usually have little post-its that would say continue or move on, but I cleared the board out of the way there. So for a big secret reveal, or I just accidentally deleted those. But yeah, that is the democratic kind of part that stays within the Lean Coffee format. So we would have our vote together and decide if we want to add the extra time, add time to the timer, or move it on and go to the next topic. And you can get through about 5 or 6 different topics in the 1 hour if you stay on track. And if not, if people want to give more time to other topics, I remember having that continue move on vote 3 times for one topic, and it was just people really started to get on a roll. I would not really vote after the second time. I would just say, okay, we've added like a total of 6 minutes, we've doubled the length of this conversation. To have fairness, I think it's time that we move on to our next topic. There is also the follow-up column, and I think that's a great space where if people didn't feel like they got to finish saying things, they can actually use post-its and write up and add to that previous conversation. People can also share links there as well. So at the end of a Lean Coffee, I would also turn this board into a PNG and then send it to everybody so that they were able to kind of remember the different discussion points that happened. And that is essentially what the Lean Coffee format is. It has been an absolute pleasure running these, getting to hear different people's insights, getting to hear the different advice that people had, and the impact as well that it's had on different people. Within Northern Ireland, I know 2 people who are very grateful for having gone to Lean Coffee. So they were grateful to me for running it, but I think that it was very much themselves, after a few sessions, attending, listening, that they started to speak up at these events more. And because they started speaking up and sharing their experiences, they then introduced themselves to the wider community, and that's how 2 studios ended up hiring them for different roles, because these people put themselves out there. So really this was creating a platform for them to introduce themselves to everybody and get their first jobs in industry. So it was probably my proudest thing about running the Lean Coffee. Do people have questions? Because I also talked through that very, very quickly. I maybe necked my whole coffee right before this started. Yeah, really smart.
Sorry, I have another one. I'm curious because you mentioned house rules. Maybe if you could go like a little bit in detail about what are your rule of thumbs for those, because I do that, for example, and I'm going to do it again for producers. And I just wonder how you get people to introduce themselves. Like, how much do you want to know about them? Or do you let them not, for example, say which studio they're from or like what their job title is, etc.?
Yeah, I would always say if you're comfortable sharing that information, but there is something to that kind of anonymity as well. It's a tough one. So with the Discord, I think that was the easiest because there were no cameras. Very few people had their full names, never mind their companies. Some people were comfortable with it, and I think that's great. They were in a position of privilege where they decided to share, yes, I am in this role at this place, and this is my experience. In person, you would usually introduce yourself and your company. And then that kind of builds a mutual trust as well, where you're sharing your experiences, your insights, and you don't necessarily want people to repeat that it came from you, and you're not representing your company when you're at these meetings. You are just a person sharing. So it's entirely what you feel comfortable with as a facilitator, but also knowing who is being invited into the space. So I would maybe run one of these Lean Coffees in person, but it would be studio heads. It would be people who are employed in local studios who I would know somewhat personally. And that is a different environment than putting a link up online and not really knowing who's going to show up. So it really is a judgment call. Lean coffee it's a very loose structure, which I absolutely love. It's very, very simple. So it's really up to you as a facilitator how you want to move things around, how you want to bend the rules to fit the purpose that you want it to meet. So but the Chatham House rule is definitely one that I would memorize and say, and I would also discourage swearing and encourage people to be open-minded and be respectful, and make it very clear that if you are disrespectful, so anything that would be like any of the phobics, that's not tolerated in this space. This is a supportive space for people to encourage each other and not talk negatively and not share views that are harmful to others. So,
yeah. Sure. I have one more follow-up, but I will wait for someone else first to go.
Yeah. Oh, I would also encourage people to use the raising hand functions as well, so that we don't end up with people talking over each other. And also it means that you can sometimes have someone who is very engaging and you want to make sure that you're leaving space for other people to also step in. But Svetlana, go for it if you have another question.
Just really the minimum and maximum, a rough number of people you find it best for, because I found that like 5 people was really good. Just wonder what you think.
Yeah, I would say 7 is my happy number. I would not necessarily do more than 15. I'm not sure how many people are currently here. I think we've got 10. Because Jonas is just kind of observing, watching, a protector, a guardian.
There's 13 of us in the call. Then don't count me. There's 12.
Okay. Well, so yeah, like this would be kind of the higher number. Now we did have like 20 people sign up for it, but then always expect a few people to not show up. I would also try and put something whenever I'm posting anything up online that has got a limited number of attendees. I would try and say, like, if you don't think you can attend, or if you need to cancel, please release your space, as there are people who could benefit from this. The Discord was very different. That felt more like a podcast nearly, where I had interviewees come up and start talking, and it was a little intimidating, and there were definitely weeks where it was nearly impossible to get people up, and I was very lucky that I grew to develop friendships, and that there would be regulars who would show up, and they would be happy to come up onto the stage and talk through things, because what I didn't want to do was be the Leela radio show. Although it was so tempting, so tempting, just getting all this information and wanting to be able to share. I did like the Discord a lot. I thought that was a really, really good format, and it meant that people could listen in. Like, so many people told me that they used to log into it on their drive to work, or sit on it in their offices. Like, they couldn't join in. Some of them did try to, or they would like be whispering into the mic, like, I'm currently in my office and there's a bunch of people and there's a meeting happening next to me, but I just wanted to, and then they would share their insights. So that was really nice. Does anybody else have questions? And I counted to 10 in my head. Very, very fast there. Right, well, are people okay to take part in a lean coffee? And I'll share the link with you and we can do a practice. Okay. Okay. Yes, silly Google counted my screen as a participant. Right, if people want to click that link and let me know if it's working. Yeah. Oh,
Just Jonas
yes.
jumping in here just to say we're going to stop the recording of the this session here, just so that those taking part in the lean coffee can talk freely, and this is not content that is like intended to be kind of shared so that you can all have that kind of privacy to your conversation. The recording will probably pick up after the Lean Coffee when we kind of go back into a little bit more like the review kind of workshop stuff. So if you're watching this recording, time is going to skip, and that is intentional. Thank you for watching.
Yeah. Okay, and we're back to the recording. So just for context, we've gone through a Lean Coffee. We talked about various topics. We used the voting to continue or move on, and we added extra time to a few of our discussions. We moved on from talking about develop because not everyone who is in the meeting is attending, and that's something to keep in mind, that we want to try and make sure that everyone feels that they're getting something from a discussion. So also sometimes you might have someone post in a question or topic where it's like, how do you solve this problem in coding? And it's like, this is very specific to what you do. I would sometimes put that in the follow-up and say that if anyone has insight and wants to help this person, to follow up in whatever group chat or message board that you have, so that that person can feel heard. But we don't necessarily want to spend 5 minutes talking about a very niche problem. So any other questions? I did such a good job. I just want to call back before the recording stopped or started back up. Sarah did ask about reading out the different questions that have been asked. So that's something that I do to fill a bit of the voting time so that people feel that they've been heard. It also is good practice to keep an eye on what people are writing to make sure nothing inappropriate is getting through. And also there's an opportunity to group together similar topics or questions. And this is just something that comes with practice as a facilitator, and definitely having 2 screens at the same time can help with managing. So we've got like 1 more minute if anyone wants to jump in. Oh, Sarah?
I was trying to give other people the opportunity to ask stuff, but yeah, is there a template mural that we can actually use, or do you have like resources that you recommend for running our own?
So this is the one that I made for Limit Break. I can remove the Limit Break logo and the colors and just create a PNG, and you can put that up in the background. There are resources, so I'll send out the slides that I was working on, plus links to leancoffee.org, and then there's another called Agile, and it gives a bit of background. It's very much a simple structure that you can pick up and run with and adapt to fit your purpose and to do your own branding. I just want to say Danny had a question there, recommendations of resources to learn Lean Coffee. Yeah, so I will share what I have and then the different links. And I think attending, like if you don't feel that from this one session you feel comfortable going ahead and running your own, keeping an eye out for other people, or even taking it in turns, please do feel free to reach out to Jonas. No pressure on Jonas, but if you want to run a Lean Coffee in a safe space, you could do that with Limit Break. This is something that we've chatted about last year as well, which is encouraging members to get stuck in and have a go facilitating an event. If you want to do that, myself or Jonas will be there as your backup facilitator, because it can be a bit stressful. I've run programs online where there have been people who, as they're about to give up and present, have had panic attacks. And luckily, like, so this is just staying very agile, was able to put a different presenter up, get them to go present to the group, and then talk to the facilitator aside and see, like, do you need a few minutes or do you want to just cancel it? And it's just being very adaptable. And yeah, is there anything left? Oh, Canva. Yeah, I did use Canva to create this as well. So yeah, okay. I think that's us on time.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, I'd say so.
Yep, we'll wrap up.
1:32. Thanks everyone for joining us. I will stop the recording there. If you're watching the recording, thank you very much for watching the recording. I hope you have found this valuable, and have a nice day.